Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras.
And I'm Natasha Kircha. Coming up in today's newscast, Defense Minister Bennett makes history as he bans a far-left group from the West Bank for the very first time.
Sensing danger, the IDF begins installing new tech along the Israel-Lebanon border.
And get ready because a world-famous cyclist is taking us on a once-in-a-lifetime tour through the Holy Land.
Extremists on the right, extremists on the left. It's all the same in the eyes of Israel. And now for the first time ever, Israel has banned a left-wing group from entry into Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank. In light of new information, Defense Minister Naftali Bennett has ordered all security forces to bar members of Anarchists Against the Wall from entering Judea and Samaria. Now, the group is described as an anti-Zionist organization founded in 2003, intent on protesting the Israeli security barrier. But evidence collected by security forces, and even from disabled IDF veterans, allegedly shows that they're more intent on initiating violent, weekly provocations against IDF soldiers in multiple Palestinian villages. Bennett's office also explains that the circus is over, as some 30 activists are now banned from activities in the West Bank, including from other groups. But Anarchists Against the Wall was the only one named in particular. And chief among the banned members is Jonathan Pollock, the group's founder and a graphic designer at the Haaretz Daily, who is currently in jail for skipping criminal court proceedings.
Well, now joining us with all of the details on the recent decision to ban extreme left activists from entering the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, please welcome Executive Director of Honest Reporting, Daniel Pomeranz. All right, so let's first talk about these activists. How many activists exist like this in Israel?
Well, there are large numbers of activists on the right and on the left, but what we're talking about here aren't really activists. Both on the right and on the left. On the right, there were people who were actually carrying out terror attacks against Palestinians, and over on the left, there are people who are physically attacking IDF soldiers or helping to engineer riots in which other people physically attack IDF soldiers.
And who's the base of support for these organizations?
Well, there is a local base of support. It's somewhat niche. Also, some of the larger left-wing organizations.
For which organization? The right wing is niche?
Well, both organizations, when you get to the extremes, tend to be niche. Mm-hmm. But some of the larger ones, for example, B'Tselem and Breaking the Silence, they actually get about 65% of their funding from European governments. But there is local support as well.
Now, my question here is kind of, there are a lot of critics who are saying, okay, there's a fine line here in terms of allowing people to speak freely about their beliefs, and then, you know, essentially stopping them from having a voice here in Israel. Is that what we're seeing take place with Bennett's decision right now?
Well, the accusation against Jonathan Pollock, who's an employee of Haaretz newspaper, is that he was physically attacking IDF soldiers. That's not free speech. That's assault and battery, right, even if it's against a soldier. Now, did he really do it? Well, he never denied it. He simply denied that Israeli courts have any authority over him and refused to show up. The result of that is that he was arrested several days ago, not for his actions in the West Bank, but for missing his court date.
For skipping his court. Wow. All right. So what's going to happen now with Anarchists Against the Wall? I mean, can they continue to act, and what happens if they are found in the West Bank beyond today?
Well, the first thing they would have to do is actually begin showing up to their court dates. They can contest this in military court. They can appeal it all the way up to the Israeli Supreme Court. And ultimately, they could, in the past, orders like this have sometimes been overturned, or more likely they've been limited or modified in certain ways in order to protect people's rights to free speech, while at the same time protecting both Israeli soldiers who might be under attack or Palestinian civilians who could be under attack by far-right groups.
Well, I think there are a lot of people who are wondering, then, what is the future of other organizations like this? Are we going to see more organizations banned for speaking out against Israel?
Well, to be clear, this organization hasn't been banned, and their activities have been limited, but not for speaking out against Israel. It's been for physically assaulting IDF soldiers. That's not legal in any country in the world. It's not legal in Israel, and it actually creates a safer situation for everyone if you can prevent these sorts of assaults from happening before they take place. Otherwise, it's just a recipe for people getting hurt.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
In other news, an Arab-Israeli Knesset member is now under the spotlight for her consistent support for terrorism, and several party officials from across the spectrum are now calling for her dismissal from the coming March elections.
Knesset member Hiba Yazbak from the Balad party and the Joint Arab List is not a household name, but all eyes are now on her and her alleged history of systematic support for terrorists and crimes against the state. Yazbak has posted messages in support of terrorist murderers like Samir Kuntar and spies like Amir Mechol. And just a few days ago, she even posted a photo of herself with Islamic movement head Raed Salah, who is currently in prison for incitement to terror and association with radical Islamic movements. So now Likud Knesset member Ophir Katz is petitioning the Elections Committee to bar Yazbak from Knesset out of a sense of moral duty. And both the Israel Beiteinu and Blue and White parties have announced support for her disqualification too. Similarly, Larissa Trimbobler, the wife of Yigal Amir who murdered Yitzhak Rabin, is also on the ban list. Now, meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu is also facing an uncertain future in the Knesset. A majority of Knesset officials are pressuring Speaker Yuli Edelstein to form the committee to decide on the Prime Minister's immunity. But as a Likud Knesset member himself, Edelstein is also being pressured not to listen, and specifically by Justice Minister and Likud Knesset member Amir Ohana. As long as Netanyahu's immunity is not brought to a vote, Attorney General Mandelblit cannot begin trial proceedings.
Now, pictures of her are all around the country. Now that Russian President Vladimir Putin is coming to Israel, many are curious, will the leader let Israeli-American Naama Issachar free from her jail cell in Moscow? We'll hear with some context, and hopefully answers is ILTV's Shanna Foltz. So tell us, what has happened to Naama Issachar? Who is she?
Now, Naama Issachar, she's a young 27-year-old woman, and she is in a jail in Moscow for 7.5 more years. That's how long her sentence was. And that's for having about a handful of marijuana in her checked luggage. When she was arrested in the airport, she had been on her way from India to Israel, and she was detained there.
Yeah, it was a stopover. And we know that a lot of people, that she, first of all, denied the allegations that she had packed the cannabis, and also that this has been arguably a very political imprisonment because Russia wanted Alexei Burkov, this other hacker who was arrested by Israel around the same time that she was, that the United States wanted extradited, so it was a whole mess.
They believe people say that she's a political toy, essentially.
Yes.
All right, so talk to us about the update right now.
So the update is that Israeli media is reporting they believe that she's going to be pardoned. And they believe that that's going to happen later this week. And we have a couple of details and ideas as to why we think that's going to happen. And that is because the family, the Issachar family, has been told to not accept any more interviews with the press, to keep things low-key, and that's kind of a signal that we might hear news on Thursday. Now, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, is coming to Israel on Thursday to participate in a conference. It's been 75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, so he's going to be here for that. But in addition to that visit, he's expected to announce a pardon for Issachar.
Yeah, and if this happens, it's going to be a huge deal for the family who has really been suffering throughout this time. And Israelis have been protesting. They want the release of this young girl. She's just 27 years old. And the punishment does not fit the crime, according to what many critics are saying. So it will certainly be interesting to see if the pardon does happen.
It's been a long time coming. I know 2 appeals have already gone unanswered, or rejected, rather.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much for joining us with this update.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Hezbollah, the Iran-backed militant group in Lebanon, has long been considered a terrorist organization by many countries around the world. And now one more country is adopting this position, but Israel says that it's far from enough. The United Kingdom has just added Lebanon's Hezbollah movement to their terror blacklist, and now the Israeli Foreign Minister and U.S. Secretary of State are calling on more countries to do the same. Now that Hezbollah's political wing has been blacklisted, they're subject to asset freezing by the British Finance Ministry, which means that any individual or institution in the UK with accounts or financial services connected to Hezbollah must suspend them or face prosecution. Israel is applauding the move, saying that it's an achievement for Israel in its struggles against Iran and its proxies in the region. Hezbollah is a Shiite movement that was established in 1982 during the Lebanese Civil War by Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, and it's seen as a key component of Iran's strategy for regional influence.
Ever feel like you have a sixth sense?
Yeah, like you can feel something going on underneath the surface of it all.
Well, if you're the IDF, it's actually not too far-fetched.
That's right. Israel's army is installing a number of underground sensors at the border of Lebanon and Israel that are meant to detect any new tunnels being built. And just last year, forces found 6 passageways dug out by Hezbollah in an attempt to make themselves a secret entryway into the Jewish state and to eventually cause death and destruction on Israeli soil.
But don't worry, a spokesman for the IDF says the devices are being installed now simply because the sensor technology has passed all the tests and are fully operational. And he notes that the system is a preventative step and not based on any new intelligence.
Now, the sensors will collect both acoustic and seismic data, and they'll be connected near the Misgav Am community in the northern Galilee. The process will start by digging holes into the earth to clear space for the equipment, and it will take several weeks to complete.
Now, you might be thinking it's a risky move for us to report this information and give away the Army's secrets, but Israel says the public information is actually meant to prevent confusion and panic from Israelis and Lebanese near the action on both sides of the border.
Yeah, and last year, when the tunnels were actually found, the IDF made them inoperable by blowing them up or filling them with concrete.
Amazing. All right.
It's really cool, actually. Now, it's been over a month of nearly constant rain in Israel, and after a 4th consecutive weekend of heavy rainfall, the flooding and damage shows no signs of slowing. Yet water levels at the Dead Sea seem to mysteriously keep dropping. Since 1992, one of the world's most incredible sights has been disappearing at an alarming rate of nearly 120 centimeters per year, or nearly 4 feet. The Dead Sea, or the lowest point on the Earth's surface below sea level, is vanishing, and we can't do much to stop it. Dead Sea mineral mining, climate change, heavy tourism, and several other factors have caused the sea's waterline to fall dramatically, and the result has been massive damages to the surrounding ecosystem and infrastructure, including the formation of hundreds of deadly sinkholes. While frequent showers and thunderstorms are expected to continue all across the north and center of the country, causing flooding in the Judean Desert and Jordan Valley regions. And many Israelis are hopeful that the rains will help replenish the Dead Sea, which has been dropping its levels for decades. But still, the levels dropped another 2 centimeters since just the start of the new year. On the other hand, the Sea of Galilee, or Israel's largest freshwater lake in the north, saw an estimated rise of 6.5 centimeters over the last weekend alone to 210.7 meters below sea level. And while the rise is celebrated, it won't be enough to cover the 1.9 meters that is still missing from normal levels.
How do millennials across the world view Israel? This is a big question, and joining us now with some insight is Joanna Landau, the founder and CEO of Vibe Israel, an organization that works to transform global perceptions of Israel through country branding. We're going to have to talk about that as well, but tell us first, a survey was recently done regarding the perception of Israel among young people, among millennials. What came out? What's the details?
So we actually did the survey last year, and then we repeated it the year after, so 2018 and 19. We found mainly that when we asked what are the associations that people have, what word comes up when they think of Israel, we were expecting to see the Israeli-Palestinian conflict high up there. The first answer was Judaism.
Interesting.
And most of the other answers were relating to religion. There was violence and warfare in there, but that was more a question of personal security. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict came in at around 6th place, so that was kind of surprising.
And were attitudes overall positive or negative or neutral?
So we were not asking that question, because whenever you ask a question about country branding, you don't ask, what is your attitude towards the country?
No, you want to know what comes to mind when you're thinking about
So we asked, for example, what does Israel do best? What is it? What
does Israel do best?
So most people said, I don't know. Which is a blank canvas, which for a brand, it's an opportunity, right? Because then we can paint it in the colors that we want.
Absolutely.
Startup Nation, which everybody prides itself, for Israel, came in only about 5% knew about Startup Nation.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're talking about people under the age of 40. We have to understand that when we talk about Startup Nation, it's kind of a little bit of an internal conversation in Israel, amongst the Jewish community abroad, and people in the high-tech industry, but that's actually not that many people.
So what else came up? I mean, were there any other terms that people
we asked,
about?
For example, have you heard of the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment and sanction movement? 85% said no.
Really?
Okay. Yeah, it's very surprising. Wow. We're kind of under this impression that the world is against us and everybody has an opinion. The upshot of this entire research was to show, and it's confirmed year after year, that basically most young people have no idea about Israel. They don't know enough, and therefore what we need to do is not continuously go on and explain the issues relating to the conflict, but rather when someone wants to have that conversation about the conflict, have that conversation. But for the majority, that's the 85%, let's say, talk about other stuff that Israel does, talk about the culture, the business, all the other things that Israel can be known for and is good at.
So talk to us about Israel and how Israel can take advantage of the results of this survey.
Absolutely, I mean, because it seems that our PR is not up to snuff.
Well, it's a question of, we're kind of a little bit outdated in our PR, okay? So we're kind of still implementing what we used to do 20 years ago. But everything has changed. Technology has changed everything. Social media has introduced the ability for each one of us to become a broadcaster. With all due respect to the, the scene that we're in right now, anybody with their phone can really become a broadcaster, and therefore there's a lot that can be done to divert the attention from what you don't want people to focus on and to expand the attention on what you do. So it's called country branding. Every country does it. Every country literally has, within the government or outside the government, what one would compare to a marketing department of a company, and their job is to tell the story of the country. You do it through campaigns. We do a lot of influencer marketing, bringing people to Israel who write about their experiences.
And have a big
millions
following,
of followers.
right?
Yeah, millions or hundreds of millions of followers. You can bring big events to Israel, for example. So, for example, we had the Eurovision contest, right?
Sure.
So that was wonderful. You have to win it, so that you can't be strategic about it. You have to win, and then you can host. And of course, Israel did a fantastic job in it. I was not surprised by it. But when we asked in, I think it was October or November, what was the last thing that you heard about Israel on TV or wherever, the Eurovision came up at less than 1% of the people had actually remembered it.
Because in the West, most people don't really follow Eurovision.
Well, it was we
Europe,
measured Europe as well, and Australia, for example, and they do follow it. And the point of that is that you have to be repetitive. It's just like any other brand. You can't say it once and then tell all the people who are already interested that this is what we did. You have to keep on repeating it. So you have to do more than one Giro a year, which we also had last year, more than one Eurovision. You can have lots of events, you can have lots of campaigns. You have to have one message and you have to keep on repeating it, just like a brand.
Well, I think the summary here is really just to try to get more people on the ground in the first place to be able to see what this country has to offer and to talk about something else other than politics and security, right?
Thank you so much. Still,
it's what most people are interested in.
Thank you so much for joining us. All right, now a 25-year-old Israeli has just made history. Roy Nissany is an ambitious race car driver, and he's just become the first Israeli to ever sign on as a Formula One test driver. Check this out.
Formula One is the highest class of single-seater auto racing in the world. And after 350 races across 20 countries and 10 championships, Israeli racer Roy Nissany is officially signing on as a Formula One test driver with the UK-based Williams Group Rocket. It's one of 10 Formula One teams in the entire world, which are extremely competitive to get into. 25-year-old Nissany first tried to race professionally in 2014 and has been practicing ever since. He's won big at lower stakes racing events in the UK, France, Italy, and Spain, and competed in the Formula 2 Championship in 2018. Now, there's no F1 racing infrastructure in Israel, which is why the Tel Aviv native has spent most of his life working towards becoming a driver in Europe. And now Nissany's main task for the Rocket Williams team is to help engineers fine-tune their race cars with his simulated drives. The fast-track plan is for Roy to become an actual F1 driver as early as 2021. And it's all with the help of the Israeli-Canadian philanthropist Sylvan Adams, who has established Roy Nissany Formula One management to support the driver's development. If Nissany becomes one of William Rocket's 2 drivers, he'll move on from doing test runs to becoming one of the 20 Formula One race car drivers in the world. Meaning he'll be touting the Israeli flag on the track to hundreds of millions who watch the races on TV.
All right, it is official. Hollywood director Quentin Tarantino says that he doesn't just feel at home in Tel Aviv, it really is his home now. And Tarantino has just given an exclusive interview to the Israeli news channel Yediot Achronot, and ILTV's Nittany Manson has all of the details. Nittany.
Hi. All right, guys. So just to give some background, Quentin Tarantino is married to Israeli singer and model Daniel Pomeranz, and she's pregnant with their first child.
Yes.
So the two live in Ramat Aviv Gimel, which is basically northern Tel Aviv.
So is Tarantino living full-time in Israel? Because that's always been my question.
Yeah, well, he says that he has some short trips planned back to the United States for Oscars and stuff like that, but he and his wife are based more or less full-time in Israel.
All right, so what does he do in Israel most of the time then? I mean, I know he has a limited repertoire for the movies that he wanted to make, but this isn't Hollywood either way.
It is not Hollywood. But he says that he writes, his wife makes lunch, they watch movies together, and that his life here is, quote, very, very pleasant. He also rides his bike all over Tel Aviv, and he says he loves the country, he loves the people are very nice to him. He seems excited to be here.
And he says that people are also excited to see him. I know I am. He's my favorite director.
If I just saw him riding his bike around Tel Aviv.
Well, I saw him in a restaurant and I freaked out because I love him. But did he speak at all about politics or the conflict in Israel?
Well, he sounded super Israeli in his interview. He said he's not scared of all the missiles fired from the Gaza Strip. And like everyone else here, he doesn't really notice it. He also says he doesn't follow politics, but that he wishes the U.S. would have a third election like Israel.
Oh, wow. All right, so
we're not going to delve into that. But
so what about Hebrew? Does he speak any? Other than, shalom?
Well, the famous director actually just thanked his wife in Hebrew at the Golden Globes after winning his best screenplay earlier this month, but he still needs to learn the language, he says, because he doesn't want his little boy or girl to speak a language he can't understand.
That's fair. So finally, in terms of work, what is he up to right now?
Well, he says he's recently written 5 episodes of a TV series, and that theater might also be in his future.
That would be very interesting.
I'd love to see that.
All right, Nini, well, thank you for joining us, and I hope that we're going to hear more news about Tarantino down the line. Hopefully he'll make a movie here in Israel. All right, now a world-famous Austrian cyclist has just turned Israel into his own personal playground. Check this out.
Let's go.
That's Fabio Widmer that you're looking at, a 22-year-old mountain biker from Austria who's known as a street trials rider. Street trials biking is a non-competitive freestyle form of riding that calls for precise control of the bike through jumps and balancing on very narrow obstacles. It seems super scary to me, but Fabio makes it look easy as he travels around Israel showing off his skills. And with the help of the Israeli tourism ministry, he's literally wowing us in every single part of the country, from the Negev desert to the Dead Sea. It's absolutely beautiful.
A gorgeous video. I hope he had as much fun riding in this video as it was to
that is
watch
one
it.
way to get around the country. I don't think I could ever handle doing some of those tricks that he was doing on a bike, but he is a professional, and I absolutely loved watching that. That entire video is actually 6 minutes, so we only showed a small part of it, but I really suggest checking it out online. Yeah,
absolutely.
All
On
right.
that note, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be rainy and cold with a low of 50 Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow, you can expect more rain and clouds and a high of just roughly 57 or 14 degrees Celsius.
All right, now before we go, let's take a look at what is going viral in Israel so we have something else to laugh at.
Oh, good.
The drama of it all.
I love the melodrama. That is such a beautiful pit bull to just do that sort of thing. That's ridiculous. Oh my gosh. I can't not watch this like just over and over again.
I know, I agree. And it's funny because my dogs are exactly the same way. If you get near their hair, if you try to cut anything, nails, hair, whatever, they freak out.
Play dead, play possum.
Yeah, I mean, he's a pretty smart dog. You gotta give it to him.
Well, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.45 shekels for the American dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube I'm Aaron Porras.
And I'm Natasha Kirchak. Thanks for watching.